Hi everyone, I'm Prez, and welcome back to Cabrillo, our city Skylines series set in Northern California. In this video, we're going to be building two new neighborhoods to the north across the hills from downtown. We'll get to that in just a moment, but I just wanted to note that the format for today's video is a little different from usual. I want to try something new, and I want to break away a little from the traditional way of making city Skylines videos, which I'd say follows the basic template of cinematics, time-lapse, cinematics. It might vary a little bit, but the core of the video is undoubtedly the time-lapse, and this is how I made my videos for a pretty long time now. But I've realized that in Cabrillo, I'm trying to do a lot of things at once. First, I'm trying to show you what I'm building and how I'm building it. Two, I'm trying to immerse you, the viewer, in the build I'm making. And three, I'm trying to tie Cabrillo to real-life discussions in urban planning. The traditional format of making City Skylines videos is really good at achieving the first thing, just building and talking about how I built what I built in-game. But it's not as good at the other two, and I want to be focused in my videos. I want to make sure that no information is lost. And I want to always be experimenting to see how I can do things better. Just talking over the time-lapse about real-life urban planning issues feels a little lazy and ineffective sometimes. So what I'll be doing is splitting Cabrillo videos into two distinct segments. I might experiment even more with this in the future, but for now, this is going to do what I want it to do, and we're going to give it a try. The first segment's going to be an in-depth look at the final builds. We're going to get immersed in the build, and I'll use that immersion as an opportunity to tie the builds to real-life urban planning issues. I already aim on doing both of these things in Cabrillo, but I don't think my videos are as good at either of them as they could be, because they're trying to do too much. That's why I want to focus in with a scripted segment that's more relevant and organized. And the second segment is an ultra-traditional City Skylines time-lapse. So just like normal, we'll end with cinematics. It'll be what you're used to watching for people's City Skylines videos, but it'll even be more traditional than my normal videos because we're not going to be talking about real-life urban planning issues in that segment. I'll only be focusing on what I'm building and how I built it, what assets I used, and so on, and maybe some minor administrative stuff like suggestions I asked for in the last video, things along those lines. It'll be a lot more focused, or at least that's the goal. I might experiment more over time, but this is what I'm going to try for now, and I think it's a good step forward. A huge thank you to Jay Bisquigglehausen for helping me figure out a new way forward here as well. Let me know what you think of this new format as well after you've watched the video, or even just hearing me talking about it right now. Just let me know in the comments what you think. Now on to the video. Welcome to Peralta, a new neighborhood over the hill from downtown in Cabrillo. Peralta is situated right between Cabrillo and Morgan, and the Alameda Avenue corridor goes right through the neighborhood. Peralta was initially settled in the late 1800s and early 1900s when a streetcar connected downtown Cabrillo to Morgan, the college town that's home of UC Cabrillo. But it was more rapidly built up in the post-war period when it became a Latino-majority neighborhood. Peralta is Cabrillo's barrio. Since about 1950, it's had the highest concentration of Chicanos and other Latino populations in Cabrillo, and it's remained since then a major cultural center for Latinos living in the north coast of California. While the North Coast doesn't have as high a concentration of Latinos as the rest of the state, they do make up about 25% of Mendocino County's population. Regardless, this barrio is pretty small by California standards, both because of the scale limitations in-game and because it's realistic to make it smaller because it's so far north. Peralta is a really dynamic and beautiful district, and it has a fiery history of local activism, but unfortunately that tradition of activism, we'll come to learn, was initially ignited by the US 101 Freeway when it was plowed through Peralta in the late 1950s. Evan Webb, a commenter on a previous video, gives us an excellent narrative of one of Peralta's prominent Latino activists. Inez Clemente, born in 1917, arrived in Cabrillo with her husband and twin boys in 1942 from Mexico. In her years as an activist, she fought bravely for housing, workers' rights, immigrant rights, women's rights, education, food security, and so on. She first gained countywide attention and statewide attention in 1956 when her and several other activists protested the construction of the Interstate 101, marching down Alameda Avenue all the way to City Hall in downtown Cabrillo. Unfortunately, they were unsuccessful, and the freeway was still built through their neighborhood, evicting dozens of people. We'll discuss that more in just a moment. But Inez Clemente ran for Congress in 1968 and served until 1984 and remains an important voice in Cabrillo's history. Thanks to Evan Webb for this amazing narrative. I tweaked it a bit. That was mostly a quote from Evan, so I really appreciate that narrative. Thanks, Evan. The freeway had been delayed for a couple years because of seismic concerns the engineers had with the tunneling from downtown Cabrillo into Peralta, but it finally got the go-ahead despite an enormous outcry from Inez Clemente and other residents of Peralta. Activists in the community cried out from the start that the freeway would destroy their neighborhood. It would plow right through, displacing dozens of people and creating an enormous physical barrier between those who remained. And that's exactly what it did. Everywhere you see the freeway, that used to be someone's home. The Latino activists in Peralta were ignored by city planners. Their voices weren't even considered in the first place. They had no wealth, and racist local, state, and federal freeway planners knew that Peralta would be the easiest path to route the freeway through right from the start. Latinos in Cabrillo had no voice, and the US 101 being slammed through their neighborhood confirmed and perpetuated that fact. In the decades following this absolutely horrendous freeway construction, activists became stronger. The coalition building that took place as the community fought the US 101 lived on. In what author and UCLA professor Eric Avila would call an invisible freeway revolt, Peralta's Latino activists came together and built a tangible artistic monument to what was lost when the freeway was constructed. And before we get to that, one beautiful example of this in real life is Chicano Park in San Diego's Barrio Logan. I really recommend you take a look at it on Google Street View because it's a perfect example of how political art can be used to bring a community together and claim public space in a city. But in Peralta, one resident had kept piles and piles of bricks from the homes that were destroyed in the freeway in his backyard. He provided the bricks, and other community members provided their labor and artistic skills to create a mural with a beautiful painting of Inez Clemente, who had passed away a couple years before, along with a sign saying Peralta. This signified that the community had not been erased and it honored its most important leader. Supported by public art activists at UC Cabrillo who wanted to turn this beautiful mural into a wider public space, the community petitions the city's parks department, Cabrillo's parks department, to fund a new park under the freeway in the space that had previously belonged to members of the community, where their homes used to be. And in 1992, they finally secured the city funding, turning what had been a fenced-off no man's land into a green public space. Like many freeway underpasses, it still has a pretty significant crime rate. That's one of the huge consequences of putting a freeway through a neighborhood, because crossing under can be pretty dangerous for populations like women and children in a lot of cases, especially at night. But the park under the US 101 in Peralta brought more people to the area, and it added eyes to the street and reduced the crime rate by about 30% in the area. Peralta isn't considered a very desirable neighborhood by the standards of Cabrillo's upper middle class. They would say it's got a huge homelessness problem, but the people experiencing homelessness who live in Peralta are important members of the community. In line with its history of anti-displacement activism, Peralta's residents have not urged the city of Cabrillo to conduct frequent sweeps. Although they aren't welcomed on all streets, one industrial street near the rail line is home to about a dozen houseless folks living in their RVs. Even though it's had a lot of economic difficulty, it was one of the hardest hit neighborhoods in Cabrillo in the wave of foreclosures after the 2008 financial crisis, the community's still standing strong. Peralta has tons of local restaurants and a few local markets as well. It's got a lot of micro enterprises like food trucks and stands, but they've had a really long fight for decades. They've had to fight for the right to even operate in the first place, and the city's tried to shut them down over and over again. An important new landmark in Peralta is the Peralta Transit Village, a community development project that was completed in 2018 on land that was previously used as a parking lot for the Peralta light rail station. It took funding from all levels of government, philanthropists, and local community development dollars to get the project funded, and it took 5 years to build. But now it has dozens of housing units for all income levels and ages, and 5 ground-level shops and a daycare. A community development project this successful really is a testament to how strong the community is in Peralta. The next neighborhood we're going to look at today is Catalina Highlands. This is a neighborhood in the city of Morgan to the east of Peralta in the foothills across from Morgan. This area used to be filled with orchards until around 1920, when a streetcar line connected it to Alameda Avenue and the rest of the city. It had a few houses built before then, so you might notice some of the old Victorians, but mostly it's a mix of kit homes, other bungalows, and some newer McMansions. And I'm not exactly a fan of those houses. Catalina Highlands is what you get when there aren't any economic obstacles to a community's development. The residents here are primarily white, and they haven't had to deal with a freeway being shoved through their neighborhood. They never batted an eye when the 101 was being built through Peralta. Students at UC Cabrillo and Morgan really hate Catalina Highlands. Most of them can't live there because there's absolutely no multifamily housing allowed, and the residents are really wealthy and insular, and they make up an important voting bloc in the city of Morgan. It's not a place you can live if you aren't wealthy. Hashtag Upzone Catalina has become a big rallying cry for local housing activists. They're just fed up with the neighborhood's NIMBYs blocking any housing proposal that comes in front of them, while at the same time saying they want to end economic inequality and put Black Lives Matter signs in front of their houses. They're just not fighting for the communities they say they want to stand up for. We'll build two very different neighborhoods in this video, and you'll finally get me to talk about how I'm building each neighborhood in game because the rest of the commentary has been put into this first part of the video. It's clearer and more focused than ever before, and I think everyone should be happy with this. Let me know what you think about this new format in the comments below, and let's move on to the second segment and show you how I built Peralta and how I built Catalina Highlands. Make sure as well to leave a like if you're enjoying the video thus far. I'd really appreciate it. Alright everyone, welcome to the Timelapse. This is the segment of the video where I actually talk about what's going on in game, which I haven't done for a while because talking about urban planning and trying to immerse you in the area's history has come first, but now that that's actually relegated to its own section where I can do that better in the first place, we're keeping the time-lapse around and making this segment of the video just a place to chat unscripted about what's going on in game, how I'm building all of this. So this area being one of the less wealthy parts of Cabrillo, there's a lot of multifamily housing. There are also a lot of businesses like self-storage, which you see I've placed a self-storage business in there right in the kind of land left by the freeway. Used to be homes right there, but no longer. And another thing you might notice is the shops I use, the buildings are, it's just various buildings that I've used previously in the city, but I also add these storefronts with just Spanish signs on them. I don't know if they're from Mexico or they're meant to specifically be used in a barrio like this in an American city, but regardless, I'll link them in the description, and you could use them if you're building an area like this in your city as well, because they came in really handy, because otherwise I wouldn't really have too much to use to make it look different from other neighborhoods. The thing is, it doesn't actually, since Peralta used to be a white majority neighborhood when it was initially built, like it doesn't look that different from comparable areas of Cabrillo in terms of, economics. Like, as in, the things in this neighborhood that are different are subtle urban design changes that are really common in Latino neighborhoods like this in California. Like, for example, you'll notice that when we work on the houses every once in a while, I don't do this for every single house, because I just try not to detail too much in Cabrillo because I'm trying to expand quickly. But you'll notice that I place more props like front fences and gates for these homes. I also place it doesn't actually happen in the time lapse here because I lost that footage because I put it in my recycle bin and then I emptied the recycle bin without checking what was in there first. So there's no footage of me placing the food trucks and carts, but they are going to be in the final product, which you saw earlier in the video, and so that's another subtle change in the way that the community's developed this area, where it's really is a lot of small enterprises and micro enterprises that like food trucks and food carts like that. But you'll notice that as we move up further into the neighborhood, I am using zoning on the blocks to get homes to spawn, and the way I'm doing that is I have the advanced building level control mod and I have the building themes mod, and I combine them to spawn various buildings that I've got growables. And for the most part, a lot of these areas are zones with a building themes theme that I have made with bunch of different buildings. But the cool thing is I'm able with that mod to have them spawn at random levels, so it's a very nice diversity of buildings. And you saw previously there, I just copy pasted some blocks from an adjacent neighborhood closer to Morgan as well. And as we move into the hills briefly, we're going to come back here, but you see I'm ironing out the road layout up here and trying to make it adapt to the topography, and placing a couple homes, although we're going to do this a lot more extensively later in the video when we actually build Catalina Highlands. I'm using the Lijo SoCal slope homes that Lijo made for my old Calavera Beach series that I never really got to use them much because I ended that series kind of abruptly, but they've been a lifesaver in Cabrillo. These hillsides would not be the same without them, so that's another thing I'll link in the description if you're interested. So now we're going to work on Peralta Transit Village. I'm using a LA Metro station from Polygon in the workshop, and I'm going to basically, remember, this is a parking lot where the Transit Village is, and the Transit Village is a mixed-use building, so it's got apartments and shops and stuff like that. We're going to build the building in just a moment, but right now I'm just extending the light rail line over across the Alameda Avenue over here. I was considering having it run as a streetcar through down Alameda Avenue, but it was just so congested that it wouldn't make any sense. The city wouldn't have done that. They would probably have looked for a better alternative. So I put it along the logging right-of-way, kind of along the shoreline here that's now used by Amtrak to service the Morgan station. And it's, I basically have it. I use elevated tracks just so that there's a nice little retaining wall on the side and it looks pretty good. And it's just directly parallel to the other tracks. So I think that looks good. And you'll see Morgan Station is going to have a light rail stop as well. We'll look at that in a future video. But Peralta Transit Village, we're using this SoCal apartment building by Smiley's, which is awesome. I love this building, and I thought it would be a really good building for this specific development because it's got storefronts in the bottom, so I used that there. Now we're moving on to building Catalina Highlands. So I actually built this grid in the segment that I deleted by mistake, so apologies for that, but it's pretty similar to the road layouts I've been doing. It's 15 by 10 and units, and it's got, there are a bunch of weird roads up in the hills as well. We'll build some of those, which I feel like are the most important ones because I don't really build as much into the hillside, although I have to do that because realistically, cities like Cabrillo, are built largely up into the hillside, even if they're preserving the nature areas. It's still you'll have hillsides covered in houses, and we're going to do that here in Cabrillo as well. Although it's a little harder to build in the hillsides, but using those SoCal homes that I was talking about, it gets a lot easier. I'm mostly, I'm using all these different houses that I've downloaded. I'm using a larger diversity than I usually do as well, just because this neighborhood was developed, not all at once. Lots of stuff from different times up until around the 1960s. Maybe 1970s in here, and you'll see some newer houses as well. I also use this staircase you saw I just placed just to give pedestrian access from one street to another where it would be too steep to have an actual road. There's a lot of that stuff in Berkeley, and I really like it. It's not accessible to everybody, but to those who it is accessible to, it makes walking in a neighborhood a lot more interesting. I also use some of these smaller asphalt roads by Ronix because it doesn't really make sense up in this neighborhood to have the really wide suburban streets, although you'll see that a lot, just not in these older neighborhoods as much. But I use a kind of a mix of those and the wider ones up in these neighborhoods, and that's about what you might expect in a place like this. If you want to download some of the buildings I'm using, I have this series has actually got a lot of different collections that are separated, which is a really useful way for you to look around without needing to get bombarded with stuff you're not looking for. I don't have a specific collection specifically for low residential houses, but I have a buildings collection, which will have a lot of these in one place. So that's in the description. All of my workshop collections are in the description, so you can check those out if you're interested. But yeah, you might notice that a lot of these buildings that I'm placing have larger lot sizes than the other homes that I've been placing throughout the city. I've basically been sticking to 2x4 lots or 1x4 lots unit-wise in-game, and that's just because in urban areas, you won't really see lots that much bigger than that. Another thing is I finally downloaded the Suburban Street 2 asset by Urbanist, which is the street that I used for most of these streets in here, because I've just been using Kluss's Suburban Streets for a while now, just because they look really detailed, but I wanted some nicer asphalt for neighborhoods that are more wealthy, up in the hills here. So I downloaded that network, and it definitely worked out well for me. I'm going to stick to Cluss's networks for areas closer to the center of the city, largely, although I'm going to come back in the future and go and replace some segments with like darker asphalt, stuff like that. It just doesn't make sense to add that detail right now because it takes a long time, and a lot of the time I'll end up replacing a segment anyway when I'm developing an adjacent area, and it's a lot of wasted resources. So we'll come back and change the color of the asphalts, maybe add some more trees on the side of the streets. Consider nothing you see completely final. I'm just trying to expand the city quickly. I want a large city here, and I want you to be able to see that pretty rapidly. And I'm definitely open. I'm open to coming back once we've got a big city that can kind of stand by itself, but could maybe benefit from some more detailing. I'm okay with coming back and detailing some more in the future. I just want to make sure that my computer can handle the size of the city before I'm throwing tons of props down everywhere. And in terms of expanding the city, I think what I'm doing is pretty efficient. Anyway, we're going to close the video out here. I'm out of time. Hopefully you all enjoyed. I sure did. I'm really happy with this new format, and I thought the video was a nice length. Let me know what you think in the comments. I really want your feedback on this because this is definitely a big change to the channel, but I am all for it. I think it's going to be great. Shout out to Delts Gigachad, okay, Marcus Kremer, Nick Goliski, Tracy Larson, and Zeus1257 for supporting the channel over on Patreon and making this video possible. If you like what I do and want to, throw me a few bucks and get maybe save game downloads or early access to new videos or your name in the credits, lots of perks, become a patron. I'd really appreciate it. You can also become a YouTube member and get some other perks down below. No pressure though, and if you just want to support the channel by commenting and letting me know how you enjoyed, I'd really appreciate that too. You could also follow me on Twitter. I post a lot of stuff about city planning and related things there. You could follow, or you could join the Discord. I'd really love to have you. It's in the description. And make sure to leave a like on the video if you haven't already, but hopefully you enjoyed. I really appreciate you watching so far, and I'll see you in the next episode of Cabrillo.